Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Helen Daly-Fisher. I am the convener of the Equality Rights Alliance, which is one of the 6 National Women's Alliances. I'm joined here today by Kelly McDonald, my colleague from the National Rural Women's Coalition, and we are very pleased to welcome you to this pre-departure briefing for the Commission on the Status of Women, the 67th Commission on the Status of Women. It's fabulous to see you all joining us today. We have a long program today, the primary focus of which is for us to get both a sense of where the Australian Government is intending to go at CSW, to be able to familiarise ourselves both with their delegation and with each other, and also to come to grips with the priority theme for CSW this year. I'm coming to you from the lands of the Ngunnawal people in Canberra, or Canberra. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and also like to extend those respects to other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. I am particularly lucky to be living on the very beautiful lands of the Ngunnawal people, where some very intense and exciting work is being done on rediscovering, rebuilding the Ngunnawal language. So the first thing I would like to say to you all is Yomalundi, welcome, in the language of the land from which I'm meeting you. CSW67 is our first launch back into the CSW space in person since the COVID-19 outbreak. For many of you, I know you were actually intended to attend CSW in 2020 when the outbreak occurred. And so for you, this has been a long process, and I'd like to acknowledge and appreciate your perseverance in staying with us to get here to 2023. The priority theme for CSW67 is innovation and technological change and education in the digital age for achieving gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. If that sounds like a mouthful to you, you haven't seen anything yet. Welcome to the UN. The review theme, which is the theme which has been considered as a priority theme by the Commission before and is now up for the Commission to review progress, is challenges and opportunities in achieving gender equality and the empowerment of rural women and girls. So it's a huge program that CSW has set for itself this year. It is a challenging priority theme that covers a wide range of areas. It is a contentious area for CSW to be dealing with. It's an area that is evolving so quickly that it is going to be very difficult for us to be using some of the Commission's usual tools and tricks. The Commission tends to be very dependent on previously agreed language, and it tends to be very dependent on the gradual evolution of concepts. In an area where we're talking about the digital world, that's going to be a difficult process for us to engage in. And I think one of the most important things that we as representatives attending CSW or being involved from Australia is to be able to both bring our experience in being a predominantly highly, what's the word I'm looking for, technologically advanced community, but one which also reflects a number of the critical issues that are being seen around the world, particularly issues around increasing militarisation, access to ICT infrastructure in rural, regional and remote areas, and the challenging issues around data the digital world presents to us. So I'm looking forward to the discussion today and hoping that it's useful to all of you. There are a range of materials that have been developed over the last couple of weeks by the National Women's Alliances and other participants, including a couple of training videos, and there will be a video of this event as well. We will send those out in an email this evening. If you're not getting emails from me about CSW and you would like to, particularly if you're attending CSW, then make sure that you clock into that email that will come through this evening because it will have links for joining both the email group and the WhatsApp group and staying in touch. So without any further ado, I would like to hand over to Kelly McDonald, my colleague from the National Rural Women's Coalition. Hi, Kelly.
Thanks, Helen. That was wonderful. And I'd also like to pay my respects to the Kamilaroi people on whose land that I am sitting, their elders past, present and emerging, and say yama to you all from Gunnedah, Northwest New South Wales. So thank you, Helen. There's a huge amount of work that happens to bring these events together, and Helen is the captain of this year, and we're just so grateful for the amount of work that she puts in and the connections that she makes with civil society more broadly throughout Australia to make these happen, and to make sure that the voices of all people, all women and girls in Australia, get a chance to be able to have their input into the final agreed conclusions. I've been lucky enough to attend CSW for a couple of years face-to-face, and of course we've all had the challenges of the last couple of years, which has brought us, I think, even closer to the Office of Women than we have been before. The National Women's Alliance in particular have a very valued and unique experience worldwide with the Office for Women's International Team, and being able to work with them as closely as we have during the problems of COVID and get the results that we've been able to get through CSW agreed outcomes has just been nothing other than remarkable. And that goes down to the people that are working on the ground in New York, but also that get very, very little sleep here in Australia, and particularly in Canberra. So, you know, just a heads up to everybody who doesn't know the amount of work that the Office of Women does, the international team behind the scenes. It is horrendous, tremendous. And particularly from the National Women's Alliances, we are very grateful for the connectivity and the access that we get to them, and for civil society more broadly, to be able to make sure that our issues are raised at that very, very high level. So thank you. Now, this session that we're about to go into will be led by Rochelle White. Rochelle is the Assistant Secretary of Women's Policy and International Engagement, Office for Women and Social Policy Division. We're hoping that she is going to be able to tell us what the key priorities of what Australia is taking to CSW67, what side events, if any, that they've got organised at the moment. I'm sure you've all logged on to Woover and you're filling up your dance cards, but also to make sure that you've got some space in your agenda to make sure that you can attend those side events if you're there in person or if you're coming into us digitally. And we'll also talk about the communications that happens between the government, the delegations, the negotiators, those of us on the ground, and those of us back in Australia. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Rochelle.
Thanks, Kelly, for that lovely introduction. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I do have a colleague on the call, Amber, who I think many of you will have spoken to. Oh, there she is waving. Hi. Before I jump in, I do just wanted to acknowledge the Indigenous owners of the land, which I'm on. I'm on Ngunnawal land. I can see several of you are on Ngunnawal land, but I can see many of you are on other lands. And I do want to pay my respects to those traditional owners of the lands before I progress. I have met some of you, but not all of you. So my name's Rochelle White. I've been in the Office for Women for about 6 months. I came over from DFAT and have worked for a long time on gender equality issues, including spending about 3.5 years in the gender equality branch. I used to run the Office for the Ambassador for Women and Girls in the past, and I've been to several CSWs before with the DFAT side of the Australian delegation. We're really pleased to have the opportunity to come and talk to you today, and we really value this collaboration with the alliances. We think it's a really unique and valuable part of Australia's engagement, well, generally with you all, but certainly in the context of CSW, and it's something we really seek to highlight. And many of you would be familiar with that, the role that Australia, the way Australia likes to profile and demonstrate to the world, you know, the importance of relationships with organisations like all of you. So I thought this morning what I would do is give you a bit of a sense of Australia's priorities at CSW this year. I want to give you an overview of the delegation, which we do expect to be coming out in a media release imminently, but I'm happy to give you that detail today. I want to take the opportunity to get our civil society, the representatives who are joining the official delegation, to introduce themselves, many of whom I think you will know, but will already know them, but we will give them an opportunity to introduce themselves because they will become a really important partner for you all. I want to give you a bit of a sense of the side events that Australia is going to run, and then I'm happy to have a Q&A session as well at the end. So I hope that sounds okay for people. So, I mean, I think most people on this call are probably quite familiar what CSW seeks to do. Obviously, it's the premier global gender equality forum, and we have a really strong commitment in the Australian government to advancing gender equality as a global good and is taking a leadership position on that global stage. I think Australia's always maintained that position, but I think this government's really looking to elevate our role and to be seen and to act and behave like a global leader on gender equality. So I feel like we've got kind of new license to push to another level. So that's really exciting. And we really want to take that opportunity this year in CSW to accelerate international progress on gender equality, and to really use it. Our Minister Gallagher, you have seen her talk, and obviously I get a closer purview of her, but she's really committed to using these forums as opportunities to hear from others and understand how she can take those lessons and experiences from overseas back to Australia. So certainly from her individual position, she sees this as a real opportunity to learn as well as to, you know, project out what Australia is doing. And, you know, we've got a really exciting story to tell on the reforms that this government's taking through on gender equality. So in terms of the delegation, so this is the inside scoop. I think we're getting very close to the event. So we're happy to share with you who that is making up the delegation. It's quite a large and very high-level delegation. We're really pleased to confirm that Minister Gallagher is planning to attend as the head of Australia's delegation, which is really exciting. Particularly, it's a sitting week, and that is not an easy feat for her to get leave from Parliament, given her role in the Senate as the Leader of Government Business. So we're really excited and are trying to plan a really great program for her, but she's bringing quite a large delegation to support her as well. So we have Kate Jenkins, the Sex Discrimination Commissioner, who people would know have been several times before. We have June Oscar, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Justice Commissioner. June has also been once before. I attended once before when she came, but it was probably 3 or 4 years ago. We have Julie Inman-Grant coming, our E-Safety Commissioner. I think that doesn't need explanation for you. She obviously is very closely connected to that theme, and there's also been a lot of work that her and her team have been doing in the UN system around e-safety. We're bringing Mary Wooldridge, who's the director of WGEA. Many of you probably know Mary. Obviously, we're doing a lot of reforms through WGEA. People would be aware of the new legislation that was introduced to Parliament last week. So that kind of workplace equality, closing the gender pay gap, reforms on economic empowerment are a strong pillar of our government. So she kind of elevates and promotes priorities in that area. And the new Ambassador for Gender Equality will also be joining us, Stephanie Copus-Campbell, who some of you may not have met before, so it'll be really great for you to see her. This will be her first overseas visit in this capacity, so it's really exciting for her to start in that role at CSW. And if people don't know Stephanie, she had a long engagement in the aid program and then has been working in the philanthropic arm of the private sector in PNG. So she's got a lot of experience in our near region, and she's a really exciting appointment to bring someone into that role who has been deeply engaged in aid and development in the Pacific. And I'm sure it's no accident that Minister Wong has carefully hand-selected someone who has that Pacific expertise and experience and relationships. So as you all know, we have 2 civil society delegates also forming part of the official delegation. They're on our call today, and I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves in a minute. So we have Kaylee Anderson, who is the representative of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Women's Alliance. And we also have Hannah Robertson, who's a representative of the Equal Rights Alliance and the Women's Safety Alliance. So I'm not going to try and introduce them. I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves. So Kaylee, would you like to start?
Thank you so much, Helen, and nice to see everyone. I feel like there was maybe a couple of people in the previous session, but I will do my usual spill. My name is Kaylee Anderson. I'm a Wiradjuri Yorta Yorta Bangarang woman from New South Wales and Victoria. Today I'm joining you from Bunurong Country, a beautiful part of the Kulin Nation here in Naarm. As Rochelle's just said, I'm the Civil Society Delegate for the Australian delegation. I'm also the Victorian Director for NATSUA. I've been working with Indigenous communities across Australia for over 17 years, mainly in kind of the social justice space, but also in the health space. And I guess a passion for Aboriginal women's rights is in my blood, coming from a matriarchal society and having some really prominent, strong feminist Aboriginal women in my family. So yeah, really particularly interested in playing an active role in how we can kind of strengthen equal participation in the digital age. Obviously also very keen to focus on education, but you know, it is also about, you know, focusing on community-led solutions and ensuring that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women have a seat at the table. I'm also kind of interested in making sure that there is stronger accountability for, you know, estates and industries to be able to deliver accessible services. So really excited to be here. Really excited to be elevating Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women's voices on a national platform, and looking forward to working with everyone.
Thanks, Kaylee. And I'll just invite Hannah to introduce herself as well.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can all hear me okay. I'm actually zooming in from an airport at the moment, the Gold Coast Airport, on the lands of the Ugamba people. So apologies if there's any announcements or anything while I'm speaking. But I'm so excited to be participating in CSW this year and to get the opportunity to work with all of you. A little bit about me. I am a PhD candidate at the Australian National University, and my work sits quite nicely within this realm. I'm focusing particularly on tech facilitated abuse, primarily through dating apps and app technologies. And I suppose that's something that I really do want to, a background that I want to bring to CSW, because I think that, you know, technology is an international thing at this point, and it's something that needs, as a conversation that's so important to have on an international level. But I also acknowledge that there's a huge spectrum of the way that this stuff can manifest in the digital age, and as more people are gaining access to technology, something that's long overdue, there's obviously more opportunities for digital exploitation and victimization that I think need to be addressed sort of concurrently. Relatedly, something that I'm really interested in having discussions about while we're over there is also related to the app space, I suppose, when it comes to women's rights to confidentiality and privacy, when it comes to their reproductive health. I think that's something that is really quite a prominent issue in the States, obviously, but on an international level as well. And I suppose finally, like something that I'm really passionate about is ways that technology can increase women's access to education. I suppose I am so thankful and grateful for the opportunities that I've had in my education and my ability to pursue a PhD in this space. And I realize that that's something that we really need to encourage women to get into. And it can definitely be like a male-dominated area, particularly when it comes to STEM and things like that. So yeah, that pretty much wraps me up for the moment, and I'll hand back over to you, Rochelle. Thanks
for those introductions. So I think people obviously understand the role of those official delegates in their liaison. They have an important role for us in liaising with all of you, particularly through that second week. So these two are your critical friends and who become a really critical partner for us in making sure that your issues and your voices are being heard through that process of Australia engaging in the negotiations on the agreed conclusions. I think some of the things Hannah and I were talking about really struck home to me. It's very exciting this year that there's the opportunity to negotiate around technology. This isn't an issue that the UN has tried to address before. So this is a really exciting opportunity within the UN system to try and get some really strong and important language in about both access and opportunities that that digitalisation provides in terms of access to services for all sorts of people, women and girls and men and boys, to be honest, across the world, but then how we balance that opportunity against risks of harm. And certainly I've done a lot of work in the Pacific over my career and have certainly seen both sides of that, where we've very effectively leveraged digital apps and things to, just picking up on that example about sexual reproductive health and rights, you know, to support women's access in that regard, but with limited access to devices and restrictions around having to share devices created all sorts of risks of harm at the same time. And so how we manage that, both harm in households, harm within kind of other people on the services and other things. So I think there's plenty of lived experiences that we are no doubt all aware of that will be really important that we help elevate and progress language in that regard. But that's probably a nice segue for me to just talk a little bit about Australia's priorities at CSW. So it won't surprise you, obviously our first priority is to bring our voice into the global stage in support of gender equality, to share both our domestic priorities and consider practices of other nations to lift our own. We really have a focus on elevating First Nation voices and knowledge, and particularly the voices of the First Nations women and girls and their experiences. And how we bring those in, looking for opportunities to learn from others. So I already talked a little bit about that, our minister's thirst for learning from the experiences of other nations around all sorts of things like, and good examples are procurement and how we can use that to improve, economic empowerment opportunities for women, paid parental leave and how other countries are doing that. A big reform piece that this government is pursuing is gender-based budgeting. So how, as the Minister for Finance, she can make sure resources impacting, having the impact for women and girls in all the diversity across all the services that the government's trying to deliver, and that we're not inadvertently excluding them from reforms, from the spectrum of health services to infrastructure, to education and other areas. A key priority of the government will be to continue to elevate the voices of civil society, and I think you're all familiar with that. We've touched on that briefly. And then obviously in the agreed conclusions, we've got some really specific focus areas. Again, it won't surprise you to hear that one of our top priorities will be to really protect hard fought for language and prevent the wind back of language about sexual reproductive health and rights. We'll be looking to advance language on Indigenous women again. We've had successes on that before, and that will be a priority for us to pursue again, as well as other groups who are disproportionately impacted or being left behind on that gender digital divide. So women with disabilities, rural women, regional and remote women, how does it look for them, and how do we make sure that their needs and access is being considered as we move through that negotiation, as well as older women. That's a cohort we've got a particular eye on. We will be keen to lean in or progress language around the urgency of climate change action and the gendered impacts of climate change. And Helen's clapping. None of you will be surprised either that, I think we've got a new opportunity to prosecute some of that language that we had been challenging for us before. So we're excited to seize that opportunity that we can under this government, and then promote gender inclusive and gender transformative digital language around digital transformation and innovations. So I'll move on to side events. I'm aware that I'm giving you a lot of information, then I'll open the floor to questions. So the Australian Government will be hosting 2 official side events. The first one will be chaired by our Minister, and it will be at the Australian Mission, and it will be on Tuesday at lunch. And it's called Getting It Right from the Start, Empowering Women in Green STEM through the education pipeline. So it's really trying to link those themes around technology, education, and then the concerns that this government's very focused on around gender segregation in workforces and how we try and prevent that from happening in the new emerging kind of green STEM field related to climate change adaptation. So I guess we'll be trying to bring together a couple of different speakers, probably someone from civil society, someone from academia, and someone from industry. And then we'll be having a couple of other nations join us to speak on that as well. So hopefully that's an exciting event and weaves together, I guess, some key areas of interest, but some key areas of interest for Australia in terms of learning too, and really goes to wanting to do that knowledge exchange. Certainly Australia not coming to the table as showcasing this as a best practice example, but as an area where we, along with many nations, have a challenge ahead of us, and how can we try and get these settings right now so we're not trying to address a problem in the future like we're trying to do in some of the other sectors where we have strong gender segregation. We're also going to be hosting a second side event on the Friday. It will be inside the UN. There's been an issue this year with the UN giving out much fewer meeting rooms for side events, and some of you will see that when, I think it's due to drop next week. It's been late coming out, but the side event calendar in the UN, but they've released far fewer rooms, so we could only secure a room on the Friday. Unfortunately, we expect the minister to have left by then, so we're anticipating having an event showcasing our work in the human rights commissions, and as I'm sure a lot of you know, that is not a model that all countries have. So it's really trying to showcase the importance of human rights commissions in safeguarding and progressing human rights for women in Australia, and how that's a model that's really valuable, important, much like the role of civil society that we like to elevate. And just before I go to questions, I did want to also flag our interest to engage with those of you who will be at CSW. I'm familiar with the model where you will often have a bit of a debrief at the end of each day. And in terms of supporting civil society and elevating your voices, we're really committed to getting our official delegates to contribute to and be part of that discussion on this. That's definitely on the assumption you'd welcome them to come along, but I think that could be a really valuable two-way exchange. I know in the past we've had official delegates come on some occasions. I've got their commitment to contributing to your work and your advocacy, and both coming to hear what you're hearing and understand the priorities that you want to bring through based on what you're hearing, and for that to be a two-way exchange of information. And I'm hoping that over the week you'll get the opportunity to see all of our delegation in your debriefs one at a time rather than all at once. That might be a bit much, but if you would like their participation there, I'm very happy to facilitate that, because I think it could be very powerful for all of us. So that was a lot of information, and I'm just going to open the floor to questions if either Kelly or Helen want to moderate. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Rochelle. That was fantastic, and it was lovely to meet the CSW delegates, and all of us that are there will look forward to meeting you. And we do, as Rochelle says, meet regularly, most afternoons in actual fact. And we'll set up those dates and times through the WhatsApp that Helen's setting up. So just while you're forming your questions for Rochelle, it's a really good time for me just to give one more little plug that Helen has sent out a contact list if you want to be on that WhatsApp group to know what's happening on the ground, and from Australia if you're attending virtually, please RSVP to that list from Helen so that we've got all your details. So if you just want to raise your hand if you've got a question for Rochelle, that'd be great. Or type it in the chat. We might start with Shirley Randall. Hey, Shirley, lovely to see you. You just need to unmute.
Hi, Shirley. It's lovely to see you again.
Thank you, and great to be going again after our little rest over the last couple of years. I'll be representing Australian graduate women with Professor Jaya Dantas. And I'm particularly interested in older women and was glad you mentioned that as having a particular eye on it, Rochelle.
Great.
I'm an ambassador for the National Older Women's Network. Can you give any further information about the older women's issue and whether you need any extra information on that?
We would really welcome extra information. I guess we are thinking about things like older women's access, and literacy and vulnerabilities. So kind of the street smarts of the e-world and how we support older women to safely access the supports what that digital access can bring in terms of access to service delivery and all sorts of other things, but making sure that they're doing it in a way that they feel confident and they are not at risk of harms. But we'd really love some extra information if you have some to share. That'd be really valuable. Thank you.
Thank you.
I might go to Jo Stewart-Rattray.
Thanks, Kelly. Rochelle, Jo Stewart-Rattray. I'm Vice President of the National Rural Women's Coalition. I'm also being sponsored this year by the Australian Computer Society for attendance at CSW. I was a little surprised when you commented that this is the first time that the UN has had a crack at this stuff, because I was actually on the official government delegation as a civil society representative in 2018 when the review theme was the priority theme, and we certainly had a good crack at it, let me tell you. And indeed, many of the elements that you were just talking about were those that were addressed during the negotiation of the agreed conclusions. And it was the first time, in fact, that agreed conclusions had been achieved on the technology and innovation subjects. They had had a crack at it 6 years before, but unsuccessfully. So I'd just like to put it out there that it's not the first time. And given that I'm a Chief Information Security Officer in my day job, I have eyes on this very definitely, right? So, and living in rural Australia as well. So I don't think we should denigrate the work that was done in 2018, because our diplomats worked bloody hard and got a really good conclusion at the end of it. So
yeah, thanks, Jo, and thanks for your comments. It's nice to see you again. We did meet in 2018 in New York when you were in that role. So I guess I'd make a couple of comments on that. I certainly don't want to denigrate that. And actually, you make an excellent point that I have failed to mention the review theme, which is the rural women's theme. So thank you for reminding me of that. Obviously, that will also be important through our engagement at CSW. So my apologies for that oversight. So thanks for reminding me that. And that's really, it's a great reminder, and I take your feedback on board. I think, excuse me, in the UN system, this is really being held up as the biggest attempt that's been made. I think there's expectation that this will take, I think the expectation is high on how much further we'll be able to progress that, and that this becomes a guiding document that's going to be used more across other documents. So thanks for that reminder, and certainly we will be building on those achievements from 2018, and it's a good reminder for us to go back to that language, because there's already agreed language that we can use as our starting point, rather than having to re-prosecute some of that. But certainly Absolutely. Inside the UN system, our network's telling us that this is the biggest crack the UN system's going to have seen at this, and we should be able to get it a lot further. So
certainly, a report to the Secretary General was far more informed on the technology side than it was when I was on the delegation, because I remember having to give a lot more background to Penny Mortimer, for instance, and Joe Feldman about technology. So, and I do remember meeting you, Rochelle, but I didn't think you'd remember meeting me.
Oh,
so,
I remember you. No, I remember. And I saw Penny the other day, which was lovely as well.
Oh, where is she now? Just side.
She's in Canberra. Yeah, she's in Canberra. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thanks, Jo. I just did a little sweep and I couldn't see any other hands up. So just while you're forming some questions, Rochelle, one of the things you might want to cover is the Australia event that's often held
Sure.
during CSW. Just want to
Sure, yeah. So Australia does, and the Minister will be hosting a reception on the Sunday evening prior to CSW commencing. It's really an opportunity for us to kind of come together as Team Australia before we all spread out across the the UN, those of you who have been before will know it is a big event. And I mean, and that is why people have those huddles in the afternoons, because as we spread our tentacles as far and wide as possible to have our impact, the reality is you cannot kind of bump into each other all day unless you actively try and do that. And ahead of us, and you are an extension of us, kind of tackling that opportunity in a collective way. There's an opportunity to come together and kind of coalesce as a group, and for you to meet the minister and the broader delegation. So I think Helen's doing some work to kind of gather up names of people who would be interested in coming along. Unfortunately, I can't guarantee that everyone will be able to come, but it depends on how many people are keen on coming along. But we certainly enjoy, and I know the minister enjoys, and all the senior delegates enjoy the opportunity to hear directly from you before they undertake their high level engagement as well. So it's a really important element of our program to allow them to hear from you directly before they go out and before you go out. And that's why I want them circling back to you over the week as well, so you can keep that information exchange and knowledge sharing going on, because as the week goes on, you'll be picking up really interesting bits of information, as will they, and there's opportunities to join that together.
Rochelle, just on that, just so that we don't put names forward for people that won't be there at the time, can you just, are you allowed?
Oh yeah, it's Sunday afternoon at, is it 5 o'clock, Amber? I think it's 5.
And that'll be at the Mission?
At the Mission, yeah.
And invitations will be sent out.
Yeah, so it's an invitation-only event, and Helen's helping us make sure some of you are coming along to that event.
Yeah. And for those that haven't been there before, it is a security check through that building. So just give yourself ample time to get that and make sure that you have got your invitation on you. Otherwise, you might be disappointed. We do have another question from Tony. Thanks, Tony, from ERA.
Hi, Tony. I don't think we've met before.
G'day, Rochelle. I'm in a policy coordinating position supporting the Secretariat with Helen Daly-Fisher. So my thanks to Kelly and Helen, and great to see you. I wish everyone a lot of good luck, verve, passion, and all the energy and patience to thrive in New York. The question I generally, well, an idea that I want to put to you, and a question around one of the theme language issues around the gender digital divide, is around, I guess, understanding that technology we know is addictive by design. And so there's that preventative piece, that design piece at the very outset around apps, around programs in education, related to the STEM and leadership piece. How things are framed at the outset, and the extent to which industry, pulls users in for profit, typically, not because of the well-being or happiness or human rights of users in mind, but primarily for profit. And what you might have to say about the Australian government's purview or perspective on the role of nation states engaging industry at the get-go, because they play such a pervasive role in our lives with ubiquitous smartphones and ICT systems. So I'd be curious about what you think is the role of the state engaging industry and the extent to which you want to raise that.
Yeah, thanks. That's a really interesting question, and I'm going to put her on notice. So I'm going to invite Amber to speak in a minute, because Amber has been working really hard on all the language, the work around language, and the zero draft. And I was an oversight on my part. Sorry not to thank all of you for your contributions to the first round of consultation. So I'm going to pass to Amber in a minute, because she's really becoming our technical expert on that, and she's been working really closely with uni at the post, who some of you will also know from earlier negotiations. I think your question is a very good one and is a helpful prompter for us to think more about it. I think we consider the question that you're talking about in the category of harms that we want to make sure that people are being protected against as this technology develops, and as we make sure people have access and have literacy and are leveraging it to support all the great things it can bring in that protection space of harms. Obviously, that addictive component is something that the government is thinking about, including thinking about what is the role of the government and what is the role of the private sector and what is the role of the user. So I know that that's an active discussion that the Office of Women is engaging with in Australia, both with the private sector and across government. I think it's an area where we're very interested to hear lessons and learnings from other nations, because I think it's something we're all grappling with, because this technology is evolving faster than certainly legislation can, and how we can bring the private sector to the table in supporting that, recognising that reality that they're profit-driven organisations.
Yeah, well, great to hear that it's on your agenda. I mean, it goes to the heart of participatory democracy as well, and the role of really only a handful of companies we might call big tech and their stranglehold on the ways we do civil society, the ways we do democracy, as well as the ways we do private and professional work. So, you know,
yeah, and I think likewise in kind of the safety space and the online dating apps and abuse and stuff around related to sexual exploitation and stuff, we are seeing an important role for the private sector. And I think we're still navigating what is the regulatory role versus the role of the companies that are the providers. And that is, I think, an open and collaborative discussion that we're engaging with industry on. But we certainly haven't nailed it.
Are you engaging the Safety Commissioner? Is she?
Yeah, oh, yes, of course. Yeah, I mean, this is right in her purview. That's right. She's playing a critical role there. Yeah. But I just might move to Amber and ask her to just give a bit more of an overview of where some of the negotiations and the feedback we've received. Obviously, we received all of your feedback, but in addition to that, we did a whole of government consultation, and you might like to get a bit of a sense of that. And Amber's also been working very closely with our Pacific Island colleagues, and she's been working closely with the posts who are getting more of a sense of what other countries are bringing forward as priorities, which might be of interest to some of you, because I know you do have a very valuable focus on that second week in the negotiations. So I might just pass to Amber.
Thanks, Rochelle. And just Tony, just to kind of add to what Rochelle was saying, we thought that the zero draft, so the first draft that came out a week and a half ago on the agreed conclusions, was a little bit silent on looking at the private sector and particularly digital technology platforms and looking at the role they kind of play in the technology ecosystem. So we've been working really closely with the eSafety Commission to kind of bolster up a little bit of that language and look at clever ways of bringing looking at kind of accountability mechanisms and kind of language we can put in there around the private sector. As you probably know, the eSafety Commissioner works really closely with digital technology platforms. That's something that they're kind of responsible for. But I think we saw an opportunity in the language to bring in more accountability for those kind of big tech companies. Some other language we're thinking about is safety by design. So, you know, how you kind of frame the development and the implementation of technologies from a kind of a safety lens right from the beginning. So safety by design is a term that the eSafety Commissioner uses and that we use quite comfortably in Australia, but it's perhaps not really widely accepted international language. So we're just working with, through our United Nations colleagues in New York, just about how we can bring the ideas that sit behind safety by design and kind of find some language that is kind of internationally acceptable. So that's quite an interesting thing to be working on. In terms of how the rest of the negotiations are progressing, so thank you very much, particularly to Helen, for collating feedback from the National Women's Alliances on the Zero draft. It's the first draft that kind of comes out. That has gone, all of the feedback from the many member states has gone back to the facilitator, so the kind of head of the negotiations, that's Argentina this year. They sit there furiously going through the tracked changes, hundreds of pages, probably thousands of pages of tracked changes, synthesize it all, and will put out the next draft, which is called the Compilation Zero draft, hopefully over this weekend. We have a little bit of time to review that, and then the Australian government, as all governments around the world will do, will send their instructions back to their posts in New York. And then the formal negotiations in the room, when they start you know, fighting it out over a particular language, will start next Wednesday and Thursday in New York. That's the first opportunity where people can talk about it formally in the room, and then obviously, you know, things kind of progress at CSW as well. So that's in terms of process, that's kind of where we're at, and I'll be in touch with Helen, who has kindly volunteered to be the kind of funnel for all of your views, which is just fabulous. In really good news, we got most of the feedback in that you provided into the draft that went to the facilitator. I just wanted to thank you so much for providing a really strong rationale and precedents for a lot of the suggestions. That really helps us. Multilateral negotiations rely on really strong international precedents, and you were able to provide that, so thank you very much. Obviously we can't promise anything that will go in there, but that really helps us, so thank you. In terms of other issues that we're seeing come through, I think Rochelle mentioned these earlier, but the Pacific is really keen on bolstering climate change language, and I think we're in a position now to be able to really get behind that. There's obviously a kind of a very clear link with gender, but also the ability for digital and tech to support women and girls facing the climate crisis. So I think that's an area that we're really focusing on. There's a bit of movement around Indigenous women and girls, and really hoping to put a few new paragraphs in there, so strengthening that language. That's kind of being led by a few other countries. Canada seems to be always leading that, in New Zealand, so we're just working with them closely. Again, as Rochelle said, we're just watching really closely the language on sexual and reproductive health and rights, as well as comprehensive sexuality education, and sometimes the tricky language around families. Watching that really carefully, and we'll have a better sense when this next draft drops on the weekend, just to see where states are at. You may know that there's been a change process this year. So there's two types of paragraphs. There's open and closed paragraphs. Closed are paragraphs where language has been agreed previously. The benefit in having closed paragraphs, i.e. no negotiations will take place on them, is that it protects rollbacks on particular rights. The con of that is also that that text is not able to be updated as things move and progress, so there's a risk there. Open paragraphs is really where we're kind of focused on. New process this year, as of yesterday afternoon, it still wasn't quite settled, so we're just staying in touch with our colleagues in New York on that. So I might just stop there. Again, I've just thrown a lot of information at you about the agreed conclusions. Happy to take any questions, or you are more than welcome to contact our team within the Office for Women who's working on CSW, and I'll put our email address in the chat.
Thanks, Amber. Rochelle, just some final comments before I give a thanks. Are you able to tell us the Office for Women personnel that will be joining in New York, please?
Yeah, I'd be really happy to. So we have a new Deputy Secretary joining the Office for Women on Monday. That's Liz Heffron-Webb, which some of you may know. So she's going to come with us. But she'll only be staying for the first week when the Minister is there. I'll be coming for the full duration of the period, as will Amber, and Amber and I will be supporting the posts on the negotiations in the second week. In addition, I've got a couple of other staff coming along to help in that first week when we have that really big senior delegation. I should have mentioned when I listed their names, most of them are only staying for the first week, which is the common practice. They'll be there for the high level week. So to support that large delegation, I have another colleague, Alice Ruxton, who many of you would have met before, particularly over the last few years while we've been working virtually. So she'll be coming along, and she's leading a lot of our preparations here from Canberra. And I also have Georgie Vine, who's coming with us. She's an Indigenous member of my team, and she'll be providing some more dedicated support to June Oscar. Some of the other high-level delegates are bringing their staff, but June wasn't able to do that. So George will be working with June primarily. Yeah. But we look forward to seeing many of you there. Yeah. And I would be very keen to try and come along to some of your afternoon debriefs. So I look forward to seeing you in person. Yeah.
And our parallel events, I'm hoping.
Oh, yes, of course. And I don't have a list of those, but I suspect Amber does. But we'll be keen to give our support to those as well.
And I am very conscious of time, and Helen's very politely not giving me the shove along, but it is my great pleasure to thank you for joining us, Rochelle, and Amber, and giving us that feedback and understanding the priorities and the process of CSW, and the introductions. Fantastic from our two civil society delegates. So lovely to meet you. We're looking forward to all working together, whatever mode that looks like, virtually, face-to-face, when we're there to benefit women and girls. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for all bringing your energy and your expertise and your support to this. You know, I think it's a really exciting event. Australia's really excited to be back and to be taking a big delegation. Our delegation is so excited to be going, and we are really excited to have the support of all of you as we progress through and can help take your priorities and your voices into that all-important negotiating room in the second week. So thanks so much, and bring your energy, bring your stamina. We know they're long nights, and it's a pretty big couple of weeks. So yeah, we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks for your support.